Thank you for sticking around for our panel. I know that we are between you and lunch, so this slide could also say lunch ahead, and it would be accurate. But we're going to take you through a very quick survey of the top trends shaping digital health today. My name's Jay Goldman. I'm the managing director for Sensei Labs at Klick Health. My colleague Michael Young, who is VP Strategy with us as well, and Michael will be speaking in a moment. I want to thank Steve and VJ for perfectly setting us up. That was an excellent panel, and they actually spoke about a number of the trends that we're going to highlight today, so maybe we can give you a little bit of background. We actually have a bonus trend, which is this one, and we just wanted to really highlight that change itself is changing. The rate of change is only increasing. By the time we're finished this presentation in less than half an hour, some of these trends may already be obsolete, and there may already be new ones that you have to look out for. So really, if you take one thing away, take away that the rate of change is only going to continue to accelerate, and that finding trusted partners who can help you to keep up with this is very important. So let's get into our first one. I know the topic of artificial intelligence and machine learning has come up a number of times today, and this is becoming more and more relevant because of a number of trends that are coming together at the same time. Processing power has increased dramatically. That's Moore's Law. Vijay mentioned that in the last session. But the cost of doing this is falling dramatically, and the technology is advancing. This is a picture of IBM's Watson, one of the big learning machines out there that's making lots of news today in the health space and in other places. Watson's recently learned the ability to invent recipes. I don't know if you've seen this, but you can go online and you can put in a couple of ingredients in your fridge, and Watson will actually invent a new recipe for you that uses those ingredients in a completely novel way. So it's not just reciting old recipes, it's actually inventing them on the fly. Watson looked like this when it beat Ken Jennings at Jeopardy. It is actually invisible now because it completely moved into the cloud. It's a cloud service that you can integrate into any product these days, and IBM's looking for lots of partners who can help them do that. As is Microsoft, their Cortana platform is now available, and it's also machine learning and artificial intelligence, and they're doing lots of stuff in the health space. Cortana is able to take massive data sets, the big data trend, aggregating lots of different data that's coming in from sensors. That was Microsoft's own fitness band in the last slide. But all the different sensors and wearables that we're wearing today, pulling all of that data together, crunching it in real time, and then coming back with recommendations. Cortana is working, or Microsoft and Cortana are working with a number of health providers where they're able to now make recommendations about treatment protocols based on all the data they're pulling in from physical sensors. So you can actually have patients at home equipped with sensors on their body or in their environment that can feed into Cortana, and it can make recommendations to doctors about how treatment protocols might need to be changed in order to support that. Our second trend is virtual and augmented reality, and there is a difference between the two. If you've seen somebody wearing an Oculus Rift, that's virtual reality. They're completely immersed in the reality. If you've heard about something like Microsoft's HoloLens, that's augmented reality. There are a number of startups that are making big news here. Oculus themselves, owned by Facebook, another billion-dollar acquisition, was in the news the other day because they've actually announced consumer pricing for their virtual reality headset. It will be released this year. It's $600. So an expensive accessory, but when you consider that you can now immerse yourself completely in virtual worlds from the comfort of your own home, this is something that's been around the corner from a technology trend for the last decade. This is a video of magic, if it plays. Okay, maybe not a video. It is all about, yes. One of the trends is that PowerPoint will still not work. Okay, well, we'll watch this one. So this is Microsoft HoloLens. They're all wearing a HoloLens on their head, and they're participating in an augmented reality together. This is actually an example from health. This is training about different types of bone fractures. And they can all see this same almost consensual hallucination, if you want to think of it that way, that they can all participate with together in a shared environment. HoloLens is expected to ship this year or early next, as Oculus Rift is shipping this year. So these are real technologies available today. Microsoft's got lots of really interesting use cases around HoloLens, particularly with things like design groups who can now share design mock-ups in 3D rendered space as they're collaborating on them, or in the healthcare space. So lots of interesting use of these technologies. The video that we're going to show you on the last slide, if you want to look it up, it's on YouTube. A company called Magic Leap, an extremely well-funded Valley company who's been starting to show off some videos of their augmented reality technology, which is really, really interesting as well. It projects directly into your eyes and can create things like this at the same time. So virtual and augmented reality, and Michael will speak a little bit more about them in one of our upcoming trends. Cloud services. This was a topic in our last panel about the cloud. What was the word that he used? The clouding of services. This is going to increase dramatically over time. This is a stat that you may not be familiar with from Amazon's own cloud services. Amazon's AWS, or Amazon Web Services, was $6 billion of revenue last year for Amazon. In fact, Amazon, I heard recently described now, has become a data center with a gift shop, because most of their, in fact, all of their profit and a big chunk of their revenue is now coming behind the scenes from the services that they provide to other companies. And this was actually created within Amazon to accelerate their own rate of development. They realized that they spent a lot of time building new things, and in building those new things, they kept having to do the same things, set up servers and all that kind of stuff. So they created a service internally that their teams could use to build new technology on, and then they made it available outside, and it now runs most of the internet. So when an Amazon data center goes down, which happens very, very, very irregularly, but it will affect everything from your ability to stream movies on Netflix to access health websites to your banking information, all of that is now resident within AWS's data centers. In fact, we use a lot of this when we're building stuff for our clients as well. One of the newest technologies that Amazon has announced, and I'll only briefly mention this because I don't want to get down into the very technical rabbit hole, but they've announced a new service called Lambda. And Lambda is fascinating if you're in the web development community, because this is really the end of web servers. When you think about a data center, that big, very cold room full of servers, every one of those servers is running something like a website. Lambda moves away from that idea. It's now just bits of code that run in the cloud. And when you need it to do something, it runs for exactly as long as it takes that piece of code to run, and you get a bill for exactly that amount of time. If your code ran in 200 milliseconds, you pay for 200 milliseconds of server time, and that's it. The server doesn't actually exist anymore. It's requiring people to really rethink the way that they build applications, but it has huge promise in our industry where we often need to run very CPU-intensive calculations for very short bits of time. You could now run them in Lambda only when you need to pay for them, and you pay for no other infrastructure other than when that code actually runs. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael.
Sounds good. So at Klick, we are 100% very much so focused in the life sciences healthcare arena. And so the next three trends that I'm going to talk to you about briefly are really related to that healthcare focus. You've heard an awful lot today already with regard to how a number of these companies, some great presentations here about technologies that are coming. But in terms of trends, I think what we all recognize is that the clinical development process is fundamentally broken the way it's currently running. And so technology, the new technology, has the opportunity to really not fix that, but to actually recast all of that. So one of the things to think about here is on the med tech side of things, what's actually happening with regard to the way in which patients are actually interacting with the clinical trials that they are a part of. Part of what we're recognizing is that the living circumstances that we all have in using Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, in our personal lives now is really becoming imported into that clinical development pathway. And so what we're seeing as a major trend here is the evolution of this patient adherence and patient compliance to clinical trials as well as to actual therapy becoming much more reality. And I think that one of the comments that was made in one of the earlier sessions was we are now at the point at which digital healthcare is essentially becoming healthcare. So if we look at some of the things that are actually creating a better interface and a better experiential piece of this to create that kind of patient and clinical engagement, remember also that treaters and clinicians or healthcare providers are actually patients and experiential people as well. We look at, this is actually some of the work that has been created at Klick, but from an experiential tech standpoint, engaging and immersing people into the experience is really now becoming very much so a part of what we're talking about. And we've reflected on some of the virtual reality pieces that, as well. This is an example. We talked a little bit about Oculus VR, roughly about a $600 experience here. So how do we make this accessible? How do we make this a part of something that everybody can get a hold of. Well, this just happens to be a picture of a $14 Google approach. This happens to be something in which essentially the Android phone, smartphone, can be put into this box, and I believe there's a picture, yes, of a clinician who's actually utilizing this technology. The accessibility then, being able to get everybody to the ball game for $14 is really something that is going to help accelerate the acceptance of an immersion type of experience. And lastly, the big piece of this, which is clinical trials, is something that we all recognize. The formula hasn't changed. Distance equals rate times time. And the speed to target here in completing clinical trials is continuing to be a big hurdle for all clinical development companies. CROs are massively investigating the possibility of the virtual approach to clinical trial development. And so many of the aspects of digital outreach, both to recruitment of new patients, retention of patients in clinical trials, and then also the dashboarding of that data to the clinical sites has now become a very real part of the way in which clinical trials need to be delivered. So this trend is accelerating and changing literally weekly, and you're seeing a number of innovative companies here at this conference here talking about ways in which to approach that. This is just an example of a really outstanding patient outreach program that was created by Inspire and utilizing Facebook largely and a couple other social media approaches. But the results are just the beginning of the way in which companies are making an outreach to engage patients in more of a community approach to their clinical work.
Thank you, Michael. Mm-hmm. So all of us in our pockets, whether it's an Android device, an iOS device, or maybe even a Windows phone, are carrying around something that we think of still as a phone because that's the name that we apply to it. But really, they're supercomputers in your pocket. And the thing that we don't think about all that often is the number of sensors on that device. Your average smartphone has a whole bunch of different sensors, from the camera to the microphone to GPS, ambient light sensors, touchscreens. All of those things are starting to factor into the way that we can gather data from patients as they go about their lives. Apple announced ResearchKit as part of iOS 9. It's a back-end platform that allows primarily health-related and pharma companies, but also hospitals and other institutions, to gather data from patients who have opted in and deliver it on a platform. So if you have, say, a clinical trial and it has some piece of it which is a patient-reported outcome, you can now have them either report that data on their phone themselves, so self-reported data, or you can gather data from any of the phone's sensors for ambient data. That might track everything from somebody's steps to their walking speed to where they are when they take certain measurements. All of that can now become part of your actual clinical data and reported alongside the outcome of your trial. So we've now equipped everybody, just with their phone alone, with a whole realm of sensors that we can take advantage of. Those are obviously augmented by specific use wearables. I have an Apple Watch on, but you might have a fitness tracker on, or you might have any number of other wearables that are contributing additional data beyond what the sensors are in your phone itself. We've also started to see some phones with very specific health sensors. This is a picture of the Samsung Note Health device. And the Note Health has a bunch of sensors on it in addition to their normal set that measure things like heart rate, oxygenation of blood, a whole bunch of other very specific things that they've built sensors for into the device itself. So we should think about things well beyond, well, it has a GPS so we can measure location. There's actually an app in the App Store on the iOS App Store, so if you have an iOS phone, which will use the flash and the camera on the back of your phone to measure heart rate. So if you cover up the camera with your finger, it covers up enough of the flash that when the flash lights up, it lights up your finger. The camera can see the blood going through, and it can actually measure heart rate. It's not obviously as reliable as another heart rate sensor that's dedicated to it, but think about the sensors in there as able to collect all kinds of data, not just the kinds that immediately come to mind. So we heard a little bit in the last panel, and it's been a theme throughout the day, about reinventing the biotech company. we're seeing a trend here that we've watched play out in the tech sector. It's very relevant to talk about this as we're sitting in San Francisco. But if you look back to the dot-com boom from the late 90s, you saw tech companies that had to do this all themselves. When their products started to take off, they had to build a data center, they had to go and buy servers, they had to pay people to manage those servers, they had to build every single component that they needed from scratch. When you look at today's bubble, if we're going to call it a bubble, but the current boom of tech that's happening today, much of this has been virtualized and outsourced. We talked about Amazon Web Services. That's taken over most of the hosting responsibility. But even if you think about this from a technology perspective, if I had a dot-com startup in the late 90s and I wanted my team to display a map on the screen, they had to go and figure out how to display a map on the screen, and they had to write all the code to do that. Now they might just go to Google Maps API, and with a few lines of code, they've embedded a map and they've got it displaying exactly what they want. If we needed to process a credit card, we had to go and write the entire infrastructure for processing credit cards. Now we might just use the Stripe API, and with a couple of lines of code, we're now processing payments on a credit card. Those building blocks and virtualization and outsourcing change the way tech companies run, and we're now starting to see that happen in the biotech space as well. Vijay mentioned in the last session about being able to now start up a biotech startup company with a few people and the ability to outsource almost everything else. It doesn't mean as you grow and expand and perhaps commercialize and launch additional products, you're not going to build your own lab space and start hiring that. But the cost of entry has come down in the biotech space almost to the same point it's come down to in the tech space. You need a few laptops and an internet connection, and you can actually start to build a company. So we like this picture of the guy who's virtualized his entire company. He's the only person who's actually at their physical location, and everybody else is attending through telepresence robots. And we actually have a telepresence robot at Klick that gets used quite a lot. So this is definitely a reality. The idea of physical space requirements to themselves have actually disappeared as well. So with everything on demand, the ability to hire on demand, to outsource even your experiments, to be able to do all of that, your cost of entry has come down dramatically. And we're seeing, I think, as a result, an explosion of interesting startups that will grow, hopefully, into much bigger companies over time. So the last trend we wanted to talk about actually comes from a book that we wrote, The Decoded Company. And the idea behind the book was to talk about a trend that we've seen more broadly in the way that companies are running today. It's a very data-driven, talent-centric approach, and it really comes down to three principles, and we're seeing them now happening in the biotech space as much as we were seeing them happen in other spaces. The first is what we call technology as a coach. The idea that technology has advanced now to the point where it can go from being a referee, which really just tells us in retrospect that we did something wrong, and it usually yells at us when we did that thing wrong, to a coach that's actually coaching us in real time. You'll actually have experienced this yourself, even though you may not recognize it, with things like Netflix's recommendation engine. It learns your preferences, it recommends content to you that you're going to like, and you don't even really think about the fact that it's doing that, and when it works incredibly well. Some of you may be listening to Spotify's Discover Weekly channel and having the same reaction to the fact that it can recommend music to you that's perfect for exactly what you want to listen to. Well, that's technology acting as a coach, but you can apply those same ideas within the workspace to improve the outcomes of everybody on your team by coaching them in real time based on the data we have about them and the performance that they've had. That leads to our second trend, data as a sixth sense. We think of this as augmenting the instincts of our people. We have access to so much data today. If we can give the right people the right data at the right time, we can help them make better decisions faster. We think of that as a sixth sense that's related to data. It has a lot to do with data literacy, and it's something that can be trained in people who are not maybe familiar with that themselves. But this has to do with how do you equip them with the right data at the right time, recognizing what we think of as teachable moments where we can intercede with a piece of data or some coaching that's going to make a difference to their performance at the exact moment that they need it. And this is now becoming much more available thanks to the platforms and technologies that we have in place. And the last piece of the Decoded company, or the Decoded Biotech, what we think of as engineered ecosystems. It's a trend that we've seen, again, come out of the tech sector, but start to spread much more broadly. The idea that we can intentionally engineer the ecosystems of our companies. Instead of just organically growing over time, we can very intentionally engineer the culture of the companies that we have, and that helps us to attract the best talent, to empower them, and to help them to achieve results that they wouldn't have been able to achieve before. And you hear a lot about the culture of companies like Google and Facebook. It's not accidental that they've grown to be the companies they are today. It has a lot to do with the environment that they engineer for their people and how they create environments that reward their top performers. So that's something that we're starting to see a lot more of, even in the health space. And I think you recognize that in the trend, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, of big pharma people leaving for smaller biotechs. That has a lot to do with wanting to leave the culture that they associate with those big pharma companies to go to much more of a startup environment where they feel like they can have much more of an impact and are much more empowered to be able to make decisions. And that has a lot to do with engineering that ecosystem. So that was our lightning fast review of the top 10 trends that we see shaping digital health. If you're interested in the book and you'd like to know more about it, come and talk to us and we will arrange for you to get a copy of it. We're happy to share it. And also we're happy to take some questions if we have time, recognizing though, of course, that lunch is next. So. Any questions?
Any questions? Well, good. This is this is a very informed group. We recognize, but we look forward to having discussions with you offline here. So thanks for the attention.